I had 50 bucks left to my name, and I said, why am I wearing a two-tone gold watch and not being able to afford any food? The Apple Watch went off. I get this alert that my heart had dropped below 40 beats per minute for over 10 minutes. I started panicking. Hi, I'm Will. I'm an attorney. I live in Northern Virginia, and this is my watch collection. I've been collecting watches since pretty much age 8. I remember getting this, actually it was my first watch ever. This was a cheap tourist trap mechanical watch, and it mesmerized me because when you wind it up, the seconds hand has a little airplane that flies around the dome and it flies over the United States. And I remember at age 8, all I wanted to do was be a fighter pilot. Like I wanted to be Maverick. That's really what started my watch journey. The next watch was probably this, the Casio Data Bank, which was the watch that I thought was the coolest thing in the world because we were never gonna have anything that modern, that small on our wrists. And I knew at that point, I was like, this is the future. These two watches actually, this little airplane watch, no name tourist trap airplane watch, and this Casio Data Bank were probably the two watches that like started me down this road. In terms of like my first real watch, like the watch that I used to like wear all the time and not take off, probably around the time I was like 18, I received this watch. This is a TAG Heuer Pro 6000 from the early 90s. And I remember getting this watch. It was a two-tone watch, as the style was back in the late 80s, early 90s. You know, all the athletes were wearing them. I got this as a present, and I would not take it off. This was the watch that I would wake up, slap onto my wrist, and not take off until the end of the day. So this would be the entree into the world of like real collecting, I guess. So I was born in the Philippines. My mom and I immigrated to the United States when I was 2. We moved to California, to Southern California. After graduating from college, I moved to Philadelphia and go to law school in Philadelphia. And I took this watch with me. As things happen, you run out of money. Temple Law has these massive steps in the front of the law school that you have to go up these steps in order to enter the law school. And I remember sitting there during the winter of 2000. It was my first winter because I had grown up in California. I had no jacket, so all I had were these hoodies that were my winter gear in California, in Southern California. I had 50 bucks left to my name, and I said, wait, why am I wearing a two-tone gold watch and not being able to afford any food? This was like the only thing I had left from my childhood. I bottled it up in this watch. And I remember walking to a pawn shop / jewelry shop on like 8th and Walnut. Again, $50 to my name. And I was like, what are you gonna give me for this? Because it was literally the only thing of value I had left. And I pawned it. Hilariously, I reacquired this watch recently in pretty good condition for its age. Yeah, so this was the watch that started this journey. And probably, you know, ended my childhood and allowed me to move forward. Spending 20 plus years of my life in the city of brotherly love, you end up adopting the city. I remember back then, you could buy a ticket for, I believe it was $7 to go and watch the Phils play. Ride on the Broad Street line and you're at the stadium, and you can just watch a Major League Baseball game. Let's see, the Cubs are in town, I want to see the Sammy Sosa hit. And so I went to go and see the Cubs. And after a while, there's something about Philadelphia that makes you just start rooting for them. I have a superstition, and so I have the Kermit, right? This is the 50th anniversary edition of the Submariner with the green bezel. And I wear this pretty much every Sunday in the fall. Go Birds. It worked really well the first half of the season last year, Not 100% sure what happened to this watch, but I'm hoping that, I put it back on in a couple of months. We can repeat at least the beginning of that first part of that season. This has literally become my Sunday afternoon watch. Go Birds. Like, there's never the last grail, right? There's always the next grail and the next grail. And so, like every kid that grows up in the 80s and 90s, I wanted Pierce Brosnan's Omega Seamaster. I wanted Bond's watch. It's the Omega No Time to Die. The reason why I got this watch, that was the one that Daniel Craig helped design. And so, in the back of my mind, I wanted a Bond, and I got this. There are only two other jobs that I ever wanted in life. I wanted to be a Los Angeles Laker because Magic Johnson was my favorite basketball player of all time. And then I wanted to be an astronaut. I saw this campy movie in the probably late 80s called Space Camp. And I really, really wanted to go to space camp. And my mom would never let me go to space camp. Another thing that I did when I was an adult, I actually went to space camp as an adult. I took my own daughter. You basically live in the museum. It's the US Rocket Center in Alabama. And they have a humongous Speedmaster, the watch that's synonymous with going to the moon. And so, again, these are basically, the Bond watch, the Speedmaster are the personifications of my childhood occupational goals. And so, I don't know what would be the Laker watch here. It probably might be the AP, right? There's very few 6'4" Filipinos out there in the world. So when you're my height, they actually do send you back to the Philippines. There are people who will pay you to go back there to play on this traveling team circuit. So I did a lot of that. Basically from junior high through high school, I would go and spend really my summers playing, to the point where I actually started hating the sport. Because again, growing up in Los Angeles, I had friends having bonfires and surfing and spending the summer on the beach. And I was in a tropical country with 100% humidity running stairs, up and down stairs. And it was, at a certain point, it was not enjoyable. So I've always been active. But as I've gotten older, I've realized that there is no way for me to guard a 18, 19, 20-year-old on the basketball court. My vertical leap, which was pretty non-existent when I was in my 20s, is completely non-existent now. I transitioned to running, triathlons, trail races too, sports that basically you competed against yourself. 2 years ago, I did 2 marathons back to back. The pandemic just canceled all the marathons. And then they started coming back. And so everyone started scheduling their marathons in October. And I had 2 race registrations that were scheduled back to back. One weekend, 10 days later, another marathon. I decided, hell, I trained for it. I'm never gonna be in marathon shape again. So let me run the first one, see how I feel, and then run the second one. I was tracking everything. So I was tracking it on my Apple Watch. Steps, calories, I was trying to close the rings, I was doing everything. And I remember sitting at home after all this, I was best shape of my life, actually binging Succession, and the Apple Watch went off. I get this alert that my heart had dropped below 40 beats per minute for over 10 minutes. Having had friends who had passed away of a heart problem, I started panicking. Everyone else was asleep in the house, so I drove myself to the ER. I got connected to all these machines, and after running through every single test and passing every single test, he goes, "Do you do anything athletic?" And I said, "Well, I just ran a couple of marathons." He goes, "Have you ever felt faint or lightheaded during those marathons?" I was like, "No, never had any problems with it." And he goes, "You just have a low heart rate because you're pretty fit." I have a low resting heart rate. And so I decided at that point that I needed to stop obsessing over every single metric. So I put it aside. I started re-wearing and wearing these watches again, the mechanical watches, because ironically, when I put on a mechanical watch, you feel like time slows down, right? Because it grounds you. Like, I don't think I think the big difference between the electronic trackers and the Apple Watch's emails and messages and data are all flowing to you at all times. When you put on a watch that doesn't make any sound really, maybe the rotor spins from time to time, you actually feel the second. And it's actually very calming to wear a mechanical watch. I believe a watch either has a soul or acquires a soul, and it's imparted by the individual wearing it. So I've started getting actually into vintage watches. This is the Seiko V. This is a 1969 Seiko V. This is the watch that is supposed to be the watch that all Asian American watch collectors should have. It's the Bruce Lee. It's the only watch that people can identify that he wore. So this model. When I wear this watch, I think about who had this, right? This was for the Japanese market. I look at them and I see, like, you know, the gouges in the dial and the scratches, which aren't gouges or scratches that I acquired or made. And I look at them and I wonder, you know, who wore this, what this watch has seen, you know, the good times and the bad times. And that's what I mean by, like, some watches have a soul. And now it's like, it's entrusted to me to impart my soul on it and my story on it. You know, this is one of those kind of watches where I'm like, I don't know if I'd sell this one. That's that one. You know, I have, I hate saying this. I have a vintage Omega from 1977. It's a birth year watch. And I hate saying that anything vintage is a birth year watch, but it is. This one I acquired actually in France. I changed the strap, so I updated the strap because the strap was falling apart. But this is also a mechanical movement, the Ville, from 1977. Makes me happy because once I put it on my wrist, I continue the story of whoever bought this in 1977 in Paris. You know, I imagine them going to get, you know, coffee at some cafe in Paris and wearing this watch, brand new. It makes me feel like I have some sort of continuation of that story and some sort of duty to that person who originally purchased it to continue having, like, adventures with this watch. Like, speaking of adventures, this is actually a recent acquisition. So sometime this summer, I'm going to climb up Mount Kilimanjaro. I wanted a GMT, right? It's an 8-day hike to the summit of Kilimanjaro. I couldn't use an Apple Watch or something electronic. It's not gonna have enough battery life. So I wanted an automatic, and I wanted something that wasn't too pricey, that I could beat up on the mountain and make some stories and make my own gouges on it and you know, have this story. And initially I was thinking, well, it's an achievement, so it's either I'm gonna get a watch or I'm gonna get a tattoo, one way or the other, right? And I still may get the Kilimanjaro tattoo. What I ended up doing was I ended up actually contacting Christopher Ward. This is the Dune GMT, a brand new watch for them. It was priced right where I'm not gonna necessarily cry if I, you know, crack it or gouge it too badly, but it functions, it does everything that I need. It's robust enough to get up there. And I've actually asked them if it would be possible to have it engraved by them, the altitude of the summit of Kilimanjaro. They said, absolutely. Like, I could send this back and they would engrave it to me after the fact, which is kind of cool because they didn't want to do it beforehand and I didn't want to jinx myself. So if I make it, that watch is never going to be sold. That's the watch that will get passed down. And I hope at some point in time, one of my kids decides to summit Kilimanjaro, maybe with it. And that would be very cool if it could make it up the summit on somebody else's wrist. I got the Black Bay Pro here. Tudor's just been knocking it out of the park the last couple of years. This was actually supposed to be my Kilimanjaro watch initially. Then I realized, man, I may cry if I break this one. You know, because I like wearing it. I've taken it on hikes. I do hike with this one. It's big enough and it's robust enough to take the hits, but it is at that price point where I'm like, this one may hurt a little bit if I lose it or it gets lost in some sort of airport mystery. That's why the Christopher Ward has come into my life, because the Tudor's not going up to the mountain with me. Well, I'll tell you, my favorite watch brand, hands down, is Cartier. Actually, my favorite watch currently is this Cartier Santos 𝗙𝗍𝗲 in a medium-sized model. I just love their design language. I love how kind of timeless it is. You could time travel, give it to somebody in the 60s, and it would fit. I'm willing to bet that 20 years from now, you can give it to somebody 20 years from now, and you could put that on their wrist, and it wouldn't also look very odd. The Cartiers just seem to just be timeless. Like the Tank's been around, obviously, forever, right? I think it was designed after a World War I tank. So that's a timeless design. I know it's supposed to be a dress watch, but I wear it with t-shirts and shorts and t-shirts and jeans, which are my preferred like outfit. It just blends well with everything. From a design perspective and from just a love of watches and love of how they look, how they feel, the artistry, the engineering really. And we're so used to everything being electric and everything having to run on either electricity or gas or some sort of fuel. And these things literally just run just by your movement. This is the skeleton Pasha. So it's a Gerald Genta designed. This one mesmerizes me. Like just being able to stare into the dial and seeing everything move in sync so that it's like in perfect harmony. And just the design alone and the numbers and the Art Deco vibe of the Pasha, I just love it. I even love its like history of being made for the Pasha of Marrakesh as a sports watch, as his watch that he could use playing polo and swimming and everything else. And I just love that. I love the mystique of this watch. So like I love square watches. I do. I mean, maybe that's why I like the Santos so much. I have a couple right here. This is from a Texas-based micro brand called Trafford watch. It's their Crossroads series. And I love just how it looks. And again, you know, back to this vintage like 1970s vibe to it, even the teal color of it. I love everything about the design aesthetic of this particular watch. And again, it's part of that square watch kick that I've been on. Next to it is obviously, this is the Hermes H08, which was really Hermes's first popular sports watch. It's called the H08 because it has elements of the 0 and the 8, and obviously the Hermes H throughout it. I had to get it obviously in the orange Hermes color. It's a great watch. It's very versatile. I just loved it. I'll equate it to cars. You know, they'll get to a car show and they'll pop open the engine compartment and they'll talk about the engine compartments and the pistons and how cool this is and how many, you know, horsepower this engine can go. I go to car shows and I'm like, wow, that's a really nice looking car. All right. You know, if you notice, a lot of my watches are on different straps. Like the sub is not on, and I know that is sacrilegious for a lot of sub owners that it's not on its bracelet. I like watches that aren't necessarily showy. And I know someone's gonna say, well, how is the AP not showy? Like it's humongous and it's on your wrist. But that's the reason why I went with the forged carbon version of it. One, because it's light, but two, from far away, it doesn't have the, oh, that's a Royal Oak, or that's an AP. For the most part, from far away, it could be my G-Shock, right? It could be the Casio. And I kind of like that, right? They mean something to me, and there's, again, a lot of them have stories. They're not really for everybody else. And I think there's a difference between actually collecting watches and collecting things in general and acquiring things. And I think collecting is more of an inward personal journey. Acquiring things is sometimes more directed outwardly. First off, I just love this watch. And Bell & Ross is one of those brands that are love it or hate it. You either love the fact that they're all based off of these aviation dials, or you just look at them and say, I don't get it, right? It's the year of the dragon. Bell & Ross did a limited edition of 99 dragon watches. But the reason why I think this one's so cool is because it's based off of Yakuza tattoos. Clearly growing up Asian American, you watch the Yakuza movies, and I was like, wow, this is really cool. And it was etched all the way around. And that's what I love about this watch. Every link is etched. Basically the tail of the dragon going all the way around your wrist. While this technically would be showy if you look at it up close, from far away, you really can't see the actual detail on this watch. So it's kind of like one of those, I know it's there, and that's enough. This is my first Rolex. This was a Rolex Oyster Perpetual 39mm. It's discontinued now. I bought this one because I thought, as a lawyer, I needed this watch. I didn't want to walk into a room and have everybody else wear a Rolex and me not have one. The story with this watch is really a non-story. This was the acquisition. This was not me being a collector. This was me acquiring something that I thought I needed. Now, it's beautiful. It's got a beautiful blue dial. It's objectively a nice looking watch. I haven't imparted a soul to this one. This one maybe get traded up at some point in time. To contrast the soulless one, I acquired this one, and this one is a 1970s Rolex Geneve. I know very little about this watch. I know it's been authenticated, and it's a Rolex, and I know it's tiny, but I've started getting into this small watch trend. I actually think it's cool to have smaller watches, and I also honestly believe that all gold watches and two-tone watches kind of have to be on the smaller end, 36 mil. It shouldn't be 41, 42. Me being okay with having smaller watches, I acquired this watch, again, 1970s. It's more jewelry than it is a tool watch or anything like that. I wish you could unlock the stories of these watches and where they've been and what they've seen, but sometimes it's better left to the imagination. I imagine, somebody going to a fancy tuxedo, black tie only event wearing this watch in New York City or in London or someplace else, wherever this watch came from. This actually came with its original box. And the box itself is a green Rolex box, but it's stamped genuine leather made in Italy. And it came with instructions and how to wind it and how to it's a cool watch. And just knowing that this has been around longer than I have, and now it's sitting in my collection, that's what I mean by having a soul. Versus, again, right, I collected this watch versus I acquired the other one. We can acquire many things in life, but they don't have any meaning until we impart stories to them.